and foremost, we would like to thank the TOC and the tournament directors for running such an incredible tournament.
We would also like to thank our parents from driving us to and from tournaments and being able to put up with doing all of these spreading drills in the house.
To the LDers at Harker, Sid, Nikhil, Sophia, Angelina, Ishan, Sanjit, and Tara, thank you guys for hyping us up and also prepping out swap for us. To the PFers at Harker, Manan, Vishwa, Aiden, Rohan, Sune, and KJ for usually making PF tournaments less lonely.
We also owe a massive thank you to our coaches, Mr. and Miss Aiden, along with coaches Jason, Connor, Eleanor, Elan, Christian, Miss Hunt, Adam, Nick, and Emilio. Thank you for dealing with us and helping us get over here. And a special shout out to Kaylee for the grand total of 4-ish cards she contributed this season. We truly wouldn't be here without you.
Also to all our friends on the circuit who make debate fun, Sumit and Mac,
Cooper and Chris,
Peter and Roger,
Andy and Felix,
Sean and Cruz,
Colin and Brian,
Tristan and William,
Leo, Ari, Owen, Aaron, Aiden,
Willie, Alexis, and of course, Annika and Oliver.
Also, I wanted to thank some of my friends as well, Stella, Nat, Iva, Vikrant, Loling, Jacob, Sterling, William, and Victor for all your help and for just being goated.
An additional shout out to the AAA for teaming up with us to promote good norms.
Outside of debate, I would also like to thank my friend Leo and everyone else who is taking notes for me for all of my missed classes. I would probably be failing school without you guys.
Finally, this is kind of awkward, but I have to thank Leon. This might be kind of embarrassing, but in 6th grade or 7th grade, when I debated him, he timed speeches on his watch, and my partner and I made fun of him for that. And in 8th grade, we debated him at Berkeley, and I thought he was really bad at debate. But when we became partners at Harker, I could never have imagined how far that could take us.
I will also like to echo this. I was terrible back in middle school, but 9th grade, Alice basically taught me how to do things like cut cards. And I also asked her if I could steal cards off the wiki. So I really would like to thank her for that.
Thank you to everybody for an unforgettable season.
We'll introduce our other finalist team from the Nueva School.
First and foremost, I'd like to thank the University of Kentucky. These tournaments are always so well run, and it's such a joy to be here with everybody. I want to thank the entire Nueva team, the coaches, Malcolm, Sky, Gavin, Les, and the old ones like Evan Steinberg, Nueva administration for making everything happen, especially Claire, who's here right now. All of our Nueva teammates, everybody that was here, Jason, Avi, Max, Dennis, Kiara, Etienne, Benji, Harry, Lily, and Maher, who are off doing things at the Silver TOC, and all of our novices. We could not do it without you. You make it so fun to be here at tournaments, and you really inspire us to be better. I want to thank everybody who has judged us along the way and given us so much feedback. I want to thank my parents and my family for constantly supporting me, all of the funding and the time that they give to let me talk about debate and to make sure everything can happen. I could not do it without them. Thank you to Harker. I know this is our 3rd finals round this season, and it's really been a high point getting to debate you so much, and I've learned so much from it. I want to thank my old partner, Jackson Hayward, hilarious, and is still helping us do things like find ways to get the bracket early. And I also want to thank Annika. I don't have as early of a story as Harker does, but I do remember before my 10th grade year, I was determined to partner. And back then, I don't know if I was the greatest guy and it totally collapsed. But I'm so happy that it finally worked out this year.
I want to echo all of Oliver's thank yous to the University of Kentucky, the TOC administration, our coaches, our teammates, Claire, of course, and all of our administrators. I also want to thank my parents for letting me fly all over the country to argue about various topics sometimes. And I also want to thank all of our friends on the circuit, especially shout out California schools, Canyon Crest, College Prep, Harker, Fairmont, West Coast, Best Coast. I also want to thank women in debate generally for making this space so much better to be in. Every woman in debate is so strong and so powerful, and I appreciate all of you so much, especially our female judges and coaches as well are such a light to have in the space. I want to thank my old partner, Katie Chan, and my best friend for being the only reason that I'm still in debate. And I want to thank Oliver for, reading Deleuze with me, which is great, and also for being a great partner and teaching me so much more about critical literature.
Anybody else need to plug in up here? Okay.
Y'all want to start subscribing? Yeah, you're good.
Great. Then it is my pleasure to welcome speaking first on the pro, the Harker School.
Before we start, we have speech drop. It's the number 4, capital T, lowercase m, capital N-E-X.
Capital.
It's the number 4, capital T, I'll say it again anyway, lowercase m, and then capital N-E-X. Okay. Give me 2 seconds because there's extra stuff. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. The contention is Trump. Trump 2.0 is characterized by unlimited executive power and policy volatility, alienating our allies and upending international cooperation. Oh shoot, sorry. My thing doesn't have the author name. I'm so sorry. I will read the actual author. Okay, I'm gonna restart. The contention is Trump. Trump 2.0 is characterized by unlimited executive power and policy volatility, alienating our allies and upending international cooperation. Baller 25. Ideological majorities in Congress and this conservative dominance in the Supreme Court allow Trump unilateral and unlimited power in military affairs decisions, reinforcing executive powers and embolden Trump safeguards have become ineffective. Domestic shifts rapidly shape international posture, divergence on military alliances, trade, climate, and institutions, exacerbated policy volatility closely linked to Trump's agenda. Trump's policies alienated allies and amplified a perception of declining reliability. Allies navigate a volatile U.S. stance between engagement and withdrawal, hampering cohesive responses to global crises. Today's Congress facilitates executive opportunism through abdication and avoidance. Maduro was the stress test that our democracy failed, heeding the collapse of international law as a whole. Williams 26. Unilateralism offers plausible deniability. Executive power really contracts a narrow interpretation of void limits of Congress that rarely exercise power before hostilities afterward. Be potentially politically detrimental. It's impossible to be reelected as a member that voted out not to protect troops. War powers debates are evaded without consequences. Of course, treaty disputes is suited for resolution. Abstention operates as acquiescence to executive plans hardened into precedent with convergence of abdication, opportunism, and avoidance. Military seizure becomes repeatable with Maduro marks a redefinition of executive power unless repeatedly devolved. Democracy doesn't require dictatorship, backsliding, or advances through normalization of extraordinary powers exercised in illegally ambiguous space. The use of force abroad lies at the intersection of secrecy, nationalism, and emergency. It provides for logic for constitutional transformation. Leverage in Hungary before Ukraine legislature internalized foreign force lay beyond constraint. U.S. exceptional resilience is false. The institutions fall through disuse created conditions for the self-legitimating executive experimentation. How can the U.S. check up for future power grabs? Perhaps Taiwan. If America set precedent acceptable unilateral force international order was the U.S. UN Charter. The post-war lesson wasn't that force had been used for bad reasons, but without constraint. Maduro is normatively dangerous if accepted. The charter would remain intact, but functionally hollow. Invoking council dysfunction, normalized bypass of entirely the international legal system. U.S. rationale is exceptionally portable, allows avoiding political costs for authoritarians. This is invaluable, but where the U.S. has used to constrain and reinforces norms, Congress must reassert control through authorization. There should define use of force. Engagement need not be sweeping force. Arrest normalization questions of constraint and reject semantic evasion. Affirming reestablishes Congress's role in enforcing a flexible and justiciable standard. Pritchard 25. Propose the further use force to protect the national interest recognized and defined by Congress through exclusive or implicit authorization. Thus, Congress must pass a law recognizing the interest in explicitly approved force or consider it necessary to protect interest military intervention because it acts executing law rather than power via the commander-in-chief clause. If Congress disagrees with the president's parameters, it can provide specificity by new regulations. They can contrast the president by creating norms identify when they exceed the authority and alleviate circumvention. It can permit doctrines of deterrence regarding news deployment to limits prevent blatant manipulation. Openness ensures public has to weigh in. Congress respect need for flexibility. The president something to make a representation to bend interest or persuade Congress to preemptively recognize killers and ensure legitimacy and support specific parameters reducing ambiguity that creates judicial issues. The act has set a key precedent that re-strengthens judicial intervention, solving interbranch issues. New Meister 18. Appropriations have a good chance of making it pass hurdles that stymy the defense to correct overreach in the national security sphere. This streamline the parameter for assessing separation of power challenges, appropriations restrictions on national security spending, the current American exercise of authority for appropriations are likely to succeed in that other separation of power in national security cases. The court recognized the clause involves a straightforward and explicit command. Hints at broader issues great institutes could reinforce and initiate this trend to has done this large theme about adjudication and intervention conflict, minimize intervention friction that grow without intervention, appropriation from lawsuits funnel otherwise intractable debates over national security until narrower disputes over funding, giving legal chances the power of the purse. It overcomes challenges. New Meister 18. Challenges fails to grasp the segregated nature of appropriations arguments, rely heavily on the status proceeds are unlikely to be rebooted enough. Even in extreme circumstances, enough of an application for losses to be an effective tool. Critics argue removes the ability to respond quickly, ignores history of emergency action. President expected to convene immediately to appropriate funds or take on the risk of spending on appropriate funds and asking as soon as possible, properly place burden on the president. Use the Constitution and try to avoid risk by approval before acting. Democracy caps existential threats, risks, Premier in Campaign 21. Voters are unlikely to tolerate GCRs. Democracy will improve governance and study of risk inclusive democracies will commit fewer mistakes and fail to explore. Even imperfect democracies prevent damage made more or less likely in comparison to government. The public has little support for news, strong support for climate. That's fine.
Cool. I'll send it on.
You okay? Can everybody hear me if I speak from here? Cool. Is everyone good? Oh, you do. Judge is all good?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. There are no anti-war 1ACs. Any appeal to peace leveraged through congressional policymaking discourse relies on the same values used to justify war in the first place. Their portrayal of law as the sole factor limiting congressional action is reductive and violent and masks the real bipartisan commitment to a generalization of war abroad and a moral reversion at home that allows war to continue unabated. Mansfield, oh wait. Peace never leaves war behind. War is coordinated social policy in which allies are disciplined or social deviancies is oriented. Moral reversion is not war. Obstacle to war. Congress has been increasingly reluctant to resist a president on military action, even when it has the power. General deployment and rejection of war is a single complex we cannot think to be dealt with. If it cannot be understood, new ways need to be sought to rethink them. Resistance to war befits its interests and aesthetics of war rested on humanist cliches about the idea of a social future. This is the opposition is not enough. These values facilitate the emergence of war. Refusal of debate results in mindless acquiescence. Questioning war must be questioning the things in which the name of wars are fought. War has been treated as a discrete event. See war in the embeddedness and the unfolding of global social relations in general. They demand that institutions be smashed to remake them in the image of a democracy to become that perfectly embodies the character of the Constitution. Liberalism requires a permanent suspension of the lives that stand in the way of democratic expansion. There is no better democracy that will save us. Trump is evidence of the inherent violence of a liberal system, but he is not the cause that demands destruction for every political maneuver. Mansfield 11. Democracy becomes the impossible thing that incites democracy is the unfulfillable promise of a polis ever free and open liberalization. Democratic revolution measures democracy against restless thinking, and democracy is ever opening. The founding movement is violent because it is an institution. It is in the middle of nothingness, trying to do something. It demands that the institution be smashed to be committed to life. Real institutions are never good enough. Freedom is the thing that democracy takes as its pretext, but can never deliver. Called upon again and again. The violence of democracy is not collateral damage, but in part of its incontestable revolutionary legacy. Its commitment of a life our present can never be enough. Violence is realized in democracy's craving for expansion and purification. No sacrifice is too good. It must shock and awe us with new territories. The life of a democratic citizen weighs more. Democracy demands we enact in more forcefully effective ways. It licenses the most excusable killing. The 1AC was an attempt to render the founding violence of the modern legal order invisible by couching it in the language of representation embodied by Congress. This requires the deployment of an ever-increasing regime of disciplinary violence to maintain the fantasy of ethical governance. Derek 14. Political performatives are always unstable and at risk of losing authority in the face of questioning temporality. Injunction to conserve an institution makes it impossible to demand both the institution to be conserved, including a group that tries to empower itself against objections, even though the law seems to be for all. It is only for some. The chain of representatives signs in the place of the others. The fantasy that everything can take place is a simulacrum of the instance. People delays itself by being represented. The repetition of the interpretive models can never be sufficient to keep an institution in being. If injustice becomes too visible, the founding violence comes as violence. The performance has failed. This orientation towards violence is complicit with the globalization of warfare that has left no distinction between war and peace. Their liberal politics allow for any form of violence that maintains the status quo, which permits domestic and international policing, loss of value to life, and the fantasy of returning conventional war. Mansfield 08. Globalizing wars into police unruly state through territory into the circulation of capital limits are felt in the household and the neighborhood where there is demands for more policing. Something has been lost. The idea institutions operate seems Camaro is best. Global wars are instrumental. People perpetuate those with subjectivity. The globalization-induced wars are part of one development of an intimate collaboration and mutual reinforcement. Logic of deterrence has become generalized and creeping abstraction of all things. See attempts to counter terrorism as attempts to revive conventional warfare and fantasies. The aim of wars to save war itself, to conceal the true situation. Wars an attempt to restore the illusions of Western dominance. War itself its own counter-movement. Global civil wars eroded the difference between war and peace, so the two are indistinguishable. Vote negative, reject when you see in favor of a critical reading of war. Our method is key to uncover and resist the ways modern policymaking makes violence both legitimate and invisible. Understanding discourse from reality is co-constitutive is a prior question building political alternatives. Source 14.
resistance, which comprises second-order critiques as opposed to single supposedly correct intervention, can better expose and ameliorate violent exertions. These movements are productive substantive political interventions. The consequence is not silence, but rather fresh reflections and reimagining future acts. Movements problematize resistance. Reading is non-conventional, though critical liveliness to the world. Domestic thought is inseparable from military violence. Sexual readings by no means is dissociable from politics. Discourses of war function to provide justifications for the invasion. Discourse makes possible engagement, which emphasizes listening to displace conceptual orders. The role of the ballot is to vote for the team that most transformatively deconstructs the sovereign character of the law. Conceptions of the good and true are defined retroactively in ways that uphold the monopoly on violence that defines status quo politics. Arguments that debate should be restricted to uphold its existence are tautological because they cannot articulate a vision that can challenge dominant legal frameworks. There to 89. Law can only consider what means to be good once they conform to an ahistoric end. It prescribes to judge conformity to justify means. Law prohibit and condemn a threat to the judicial order. In the interest of conserving itself, it is an interest to exclude any individual that's monopolized authority and monopoly on violence does not try to protect legal ends. If someone is defying the law, lays bare the violence of the legal system, practice radical contestation of the given order of the law. Good cross? Yes. Cool.
Can you clarify what the links are and what the alt are?
Sure. There's a bunch of links. The first is your sort of proposed opposition to war under the idea that there is a global order that is stable that we need to protect.
Wait,
We have made. Can I finish? Yeah, any appeals for reasons why we must be anti-war or oppose it in this instance through dominant policymaking frameworks also are justifications for war. I.e. the US will say things like, oh, we must go protect democracy and we must stop the war because it threatens that. And then they will turn around and go say, oh, we're gonna bring democracy to Iraq and kill millions of people. Or they will do things like say, oh, we must stop war because, or like, oh, war is bad for women. And then they will go do things like commit mass sexual violence in places like Afghanistan, which is also bad. We've also made arguments about your faith in democracy being bad and entrenching the invisible violence in democratic legal orders and stuff about like your figurization of Trump. Like there's a bunch of links, but that's just one of them.
Okay, wait, so is us trying to stop people from dying bad?
I mean, okay, like I understand that like we really like to place ourselves in the position of, oh, we're going to stop violence. But we would actually critique that model. In fact, this round is going to end and we are going to go home. We think that debating is important, but the fantasy that we are going to do something to stop Trump just by debating and imagining ourselves as policymakers is not true. We are not likely to become policymakers in the real world, and it matters more that we find ways to engage that can actually like help us do things rather than saying, oh, what if we were a policymaker, we're gonna read this argument, and then feeling good about ourselves, even though the violence that you have identified will continue whether or not something like the app happens. But I'm gonna take a question. Can we learn things from debate?
Can we learn things from debate?
Yes.
Sure, yeah.
Great.
Okay, let's talk about your alts. What, can you clarify it?
Sure. Our argument is that we need to do a critical reading of war. That means that we need to intervene into the sort of discourses of war and like the understandings of the law that you have. We need to examine and open it up and reveal the fact that there is violence in your reading of it. But I'm going to take your question.
Okay.
Okay. Let's talk about your Trump argument. Actually, yeah. Let's talk about your allies' argument. Why is it bad that allies are like distant from the U.S.?
Why is it bad that allies are distant from the U.S.? We'd say that if allies were not distant from the U.S., we would be able to prevent more fighting.
Okay, sure. And then what is your link to democracy?
What is a link to the, do you mean like what is?
Like what's the internal to democracy?
Oh, it's like being able to constrain them.
Yeah, your argument is about voters and their ability to vote. How is that relevant?
So the midterms, for example, they can use their vote to change what is going on in Congress in order to constrain Trump.
Are you sure you have a question?
Yeah. When we vote, like, not when we, if you win, what happens with the alt? Like, does the alt just become reality?
No, I mean, like, our argument is that they are endorsing our method, and we have done the critical reading, so they are endorsing it. Is a move toward critically examining, like, a vote for us is a critical examination that looks at, like, your specific 1AC, says, wow, this was problematic for XYZ reasons, and then rejects it because of this. We also think, look at the room here, we are able to do things that can actually affect people in the real world, and voting for us is sets a, like, sentiment that this is a powerful political strategy, but that's for us.
The order will be finishing the two cards, and then they're starting the framework.
Okay, can you send it back?
Yeah, I totally yeah, I'll just send it there.
Can you send it again?
Oh.
Okay, there might be a few analytics that are just like sparsely written out. So, but also not. Like, I don't think everything is on the doc, but most should be. Okay. Okay. Let me know when everyone's ready. First, our representations outweigh rejecting actions that constrain the Trump administration leads to unending violence, militarism, and authoritarianism. Only our imagination through via reclaimed civic literacy that spills out. Bureau 17. Trump made visible civic illiteracy, corrupt politics, and connect for reason authoritarianism has returned bold militarization and violence over society, formative culture, and critical citizens could have prevented such a catastrophe. Trump his disregard for truth education is under siege. It is important for educators to protect formative culture in the public sphere that make democracy such a vision suggest imagining a life beyond the social order immerse in endless war. This requires that education be regarded as central to politics, combat authoritarians that use education to weaponize discourse. And Trump makes every form of fascism inevitable. Bureau 17. Trump addicted to violence, shaped his language, politics, and policies threatened violence, ending opponents who criticize him, supported for supremacists, state torture, turned the government into a criminal organization, regressive militarism, mimicking Trump's domestic policies, underlying state violence, inherent in dispositionality. Now, I'll answer the role of the ballot here. The role of the ballot and judge is none at all. To clarify, evaluate every argument in the round and evaluate them through impact calculus. Double bind. Either their arguments collapse to weighing, which is our role of the ballot, or they arbitrarily exclude offense off text alone, which is infinitely self-serving and arbitrary. They cannot go for an epistemological prerequisite. Since we both agree that challenging fascism is bad, our sole argument is what method to choose. Now, framework. You should only evaluate links that are causal and unique to the resolution's consequences. Anything else generates infinite egg weight conditions so they can turn individual words, similes, and metaphors into independent reasons to vote neg. That creates shallow debates where people cannot engage. So presume links false. Worst case, let us weigh the case against the links, which shows both sides' offense and generates more robust debates. Finally, treat the entire app as defense of our representation. If we're right that the resolution is the only way to solve extinction, violence, and unchecked fascism, you should view it as an educational research project that we presented, especially since their argument is fatalistic and collapses at doing nothing, only evaluate links. The highlighted quotes of the pro case, since that discourages shiftiness, encourages they can't read the most progressive and unfair links. There are two impacts. First is fairness. It controls the internal link into their impacts. Since the reason fascism and imperialism are bad is because they include entire populations independently. Both sides also depend on unfairness since they want to win. Otherwise, give us the ballot and have a discussion. Responses are paradoxical since they rely on the judge fairly evaluating their weighing. Second is clash. Only robust and in-depth debates about policy action generate the skills necessary to defend their advocacy in the real world. Nueva might present an educational argument, but they will always be outmaneuvered outside the debate since they can never learn how to weigh and defend their proposal. The only way to generate the skills and education necessary to go out and engage in politics, whether micro or macro political, and consequences of representations, inevitably neg logic will rely on a series of statements that explain one another, their links, or effects of the resolution, no matter how they spin them. It should be weighed against our defense of it through impacts which we can use to justify our reps. Now the links. First, all of their links rely on the idea that the pro endorses a broader set of ideologies. However, never have we made this argument. We merely said that challenging Trump in this instance is good and that our representations are a good idea. Two, the juror evidence says that only by learning about issues like fascism in the real world can we challenge assumptions. Yes, we agree with Nueva that field is illusory, but they themselves have made an education claim that learning about the world in certain ways is good, and their framework discourages that. Third, these links prove they can read this argument as a disadvantage and argue that doing the resolution is a bad idea. This is a better, since it allows in-depth research over a predictable research point. Four, fiat being illusory does not matter. We are under no impression that voting pro will actually pass the resolution, but our argument is that by learning about the world in certain ways is good, since we can learn that issues like fascism are real, we can challenge them micro-politically. And in here, for example, even if we're never policymakers, all of us are affected by Trump and will need to learn how to live in the world. Five, our argument is not that democracy is one model or the best, but that Trump is certainly bad and engagement in politics is good. I'm going to skip the Shakespeare card, but they've just dropped the Kremer and Kemp evidence. It's a study that says engagement with institutions is good. No, good. It's not wrong or problematic, since studies prove that when people engage and shape the state, they can solve problems such as climate change, pandemics, etc. And we will always have to engage in the state anyway, so learning about how to do so is good. Six, the fact that they said that Trump has demonstrated fascism means there's no link. We agree. We never said that doing the act is sufficient to solve or violence, or even made an argument about war, but rather that challenging him is pedagogically valuable. And we never said that Trump, and we just never made a war impact in the app. We only said that engaging with the state is a good idea. First, permutation do both. You can do the app and then the alternative. This is compatible since it does not sever representations. It solves their case better by destroying Trump's hold on power and then solving their impacts too. The alternative is worse. It says we should give up on the world and do nothing, which is problematic since it lets fascism go unchecked. Only our model. And let's talk about problems within the world and how to create activism. Reading the war without learning how to actualize it or pass policies in the real world, how to learn about laws or engage with the state, etc. has no impact since we never look at institutions or look at laws. Look, voting app is a good idea because talking about how Trump is bad and talking about ways that we can challenge that is a good idea. And their alternative functionally gets rid of that. Otherwise, it proves a permutation.
Okay.
The order is going to go the K, the framework, and the app. Time will start. And all my judges can hear me, right? Cool. Are you good, Harker?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, framework F. Time will start on my first word. Is anyone not ready? Cool. On their first response to the link, that's literally the argument we make. They're only challenging Trump, and this is what they don't challenge the overarching system of law, democracy, and the structure of the events. And conceded our thesis stands per case if the way the law structures also exclude certain bodies because it's not universalizable, and they try to include certain people are within the law and certain people are outside. But they've also conceded that democracy always fails further conceded. Mansfield 11 evidence of their reliance on future democracy means it will always include the people whose lives will be suspended in the way to that democracy, which will never actually work. The true evidence is that learning that fascism is good. No, we think that even if Fiona's illusion, our education claim is better. And so whereas they're only making policy makers, they talk about micropolitics, they've conceded that their faith in democracy is bad, so they'll produce bad subjects and bad education. People have faith in democracy that never actually succeeds, and more importantly, we actually interrogate the way the law is structured in the first place. If they prior to ever solving any issue about democracy, then they said we could read it as a DA. No, we should not. Methodological offense means it's the only way we can interrogate the representation, which is the only way we can actually interrogate offense in the round. And so whereas representations are only matter because they agree with us that Fiona is a illusion. They have to win specific references, which is why ours came here as a DA. Fiona is a loser. I knew they said that they say micro literally about policy because we've already done the analysis that our methodological offense and interrogating the representations are better because it's also a prior question to evaluating any other consequences. Our argument is not a consequential argument. It's about the ontological structure of the way that the law is, and they tell you that democracy is the limit that Trump is certainly bad. Again, this is what we're critiquing. They say that, oh, Trump is only certainly bad. Trump is a symptom, not a cause of the American system. Skip the empirics evidence, and they tell you that they solve for climate change. Climate change is literally not a solve for this isn't true. And if you look at pandemics, empirically disabled people and people of color die more from pandemics with truth. So when you have reliance on the state, marginalized people are always going to suffer from to never actually solve. There's the argument about anti-war doesn't matter, ranking critique of the way that the law is structured with the reliance on law. Also, the Pritchard 25 evidence from case proves you can see that Congress is flexible and justifiable, which means it's bad. Then go to the perms. First, every link to the data, the perms, their investment in legal services, insurance, that they're always going to have violence when they do it because insofar as they think that Congress is flexible and justifiable per the Pritchard evidence and that they can solve the bad impacts of Trump, it's bad because even though Congress literally authorizes around to be violent, then the perm is severance, even if they deny the engagement of reading the law in a hegemonic fascist way, we've criticized and they cannot sever out of it. That kills any stable neck offense and is sufficient to negate cross-party framework code of 3. The alt is a prereq. We must understand our orientation toward the law before we can implement something. Otherwise, the perm is addressed to the government and servant already conceded. Data 80 evidence. Then go to the framework. First, on the role is valid. They don't actually frontline the epistemology of they say challenging fascism is bad. That doesn't actually respond to epistemology. We have the only way to best challenge is through the role or role of valid, which proves that truth and good are always defined retroactively to prove status quo hegemonic and violence in law. That's conceded. Analysis from case, which means you always prioritize our role of valid first. That's why it doesn't collapse to anti-colors. It's always structured through hegemonic law. Then on the links that are causal, no, we make the argument that representations are better because that's what we actually interrogate and they should be held accountable for their representations. And so we're not actually made up policy makers, we're not even negligence, don't boil on potential abuse. It's a straw person because we have to do their specific traits. Also, it narrows limits because we're able to solve that. This is just the substance that they pick themselves, so they should be able to do it. And people can't engage. They tell you the proof links also. Our links were so bad they should have been able to defend again on weighing the case. They can't weigh the Fiona, so they can't weigh Fiona. They try to weigh the reps impacts, but we've been indicted those and said that they are bad. Then if they treat the acts of defense of their representations, so they've conceded the theory of power claims that any reliance in Congress and democracy is going to be violent, which you can't actually view as an educational research. Even they say they can solve theoretical violence. They haven't proved that their specific representations are good. They've only proved that their consequences are good because we've indicted that our argument is not fatalistic, so if we have an alternative and we don't need to value a link to the highlighted quotes of proof, we still indict the representatives and we indicted Pritchard. Then on the admitted fairness, it's terminally non-uniqueness. There's always going to be out-around access and quotient speeding. This fairness is not frivolous. Responses are paradoxical since you only need fairness of evaluation to evaluate anything within the round. We don't rely on fairness, we just rely on voting groups. So on Clash, Clash is bad because they rely on flexibility, which means you don't actually feel Clash because all the arguments are going to be the same over and over again. So you evaluate arguments to have new arguments. Also, the argument was so bad they should have been able to respond to it. We're not going to be outmaneuvered. They're going to be outmaneuvered. They produce bad education. Then the counter resolution is the fact that the role that I should interpret the one, so you bring it for on the role of the ballot and to through the false quotes, you can't the state status quo, false structure, the validation by failing self-covering and the creates false sense of the closure that is limited for violence because the king control walls and make them normally related or responsibility to self-structure and it's also the regular only information price of the assumption of the one to the infinite pre-round prep time to write about creates pointers. It should be easy for them to disprove it. Then on their case, Prober first talks about their numerous evidence about appropriation clauses lawsuits, which are distinct from the affirmative. That's something the Congress can do already with money, but they have chosen not to do, which means it doesn't actually solve them. They picture them to already as bad, and they tell you the president's also. Oh, they tell you that they make fascism visible per Trump. However, that's good. That's better if Trump fascism is invisible. They conceded that fascism is invisible. Is going to be invisible if you do their model because you're relying on Congress, which is always going to be more and more violent. Then also the per wrong Congress literally just authorized the wrong, so they just be able to solve it. And Congress has not checked back on Trump for things like the Epstein files and other forms of violence, in which Trump is literally directly harassing the truth that Congress never actually checked back on the violence of the individual and continue to allow American violence, proven by the fact that we continue to bomb Iran in the Middle East, even though Congress is there, which they themselves say should check back. Yeah.
Good.
Can we take the first question?
Yeah. Do you think that engaging with Congress is valuable?
No, insofar as
Okay.
Congress will always uphold violence. Like, look at the example of the Epstein files, where Trump actually assaulted young women, and yet Congress has not done anything to hold him accountable. We were never going to see him be able to be impeached. Also think that the Supreme Court being stacked means that congressional evaluations are never actually resolved. Also proven by the fact that Congress authorized the war in Iran. Can I take a question?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Let's talk about fairness.
Yeah.
Are there ever out-of-round reasons that you might not be able to prep or deal with our arguments?
We would argue that your model exacerbates it infinitely because it means that there would be links to individual words, similes, metaphors in the app. This is a model of debate that you have justified. Yes, we
Wait,
agree
did we
that there are
link to
out-of-round-
individual words in the affirmative, or did we link to overall representations?
You link to unpredictable representations because you have broadly
Wait,
criticized.
why,
things.
okay, what limits and ground have you lost that render these unpredictable?
We can't weigh our case. We can't go for passing the policy is a good idea. For
Wait,
example,
you
which
have,
is what
wait, we
prepared
have
for.
both agreed that you can weigh the representations of your case, and if you prove that your model of policymaking is like a good idea, you have just conceded that
So,
you cannot weigh
okay.
consequences because they don't actually
So
have
to
it.
clarify, voting app and defending policymaking good is a sufficient application.
Well, no, because to vote, if you want to vote out, okay, you need to win specifically that your representations of policymaking are good and that your specific reliance on the fascist Congress is good. You cannot just win that you prevent consequences because we have not made a consequential claim. We are making an ontological claim about the way that the law is structured and how that prereqs any of your impact analysis. So you must also make a structural claim about how your representations of faith in Congress and American government are good.
So to clarify, winning that engagement with the state is good is a sufficient app-win condition. Yes or no?
It's winning that your representation of engagement with the state is good.
Okay, perfect. You can have a question.
Okay. Wait, I feel like I just took one. Oh, I'll take the question.
Oh wait, I'll take a question then. I guess let's talk about the alternative. What exactly does it do? Like, how does like a critical reading of war? How is that sufficient to solve issues like Trump's rampant fascism, or broadly even the states like rampant fascism and imperialism?
The alt is a necessary starting point to solve any of those issues insofar as you have conceded that Congress will be just as bad as Trump because of the structure of American democracy, which are a theory of power claims per case. Starting with the critical reading of the law and deconstructing the way that law and order is structured are the only way we could ever imagine future revolutionary strategies. Otherwise, if you just pass a policy without thinking about the way that law and democracy are structured, you will continue to reproduce endless violence. Can I take a question?
Sure.
Okay, cool. Let's talk about your Neumeister evidence. Can Congress engage in appropriations clause lawsuits without the affirmative?
Can Congress engage in well, our argument is that this won't be effective without the affirmative because the
Wait,
president
can you read me a
always
line
do
from Neumeister that says anything about the separation of war powers? Because it's just about appropriations clause lawsuits, which are distinct.
Well, I don't have the app open. Let me open it.
Okay, well, that's cross.
Oh, wait, sure.
Okay. It'll start on the app, and then it will be the alt, I guess.
Can you repeat the first thing?
It'll start on the app,
Okay.
and then it will be the alt
Okay. That's it?
and the framework.
Okay.
Unlimited executive power runs rampant, alienating allies and appending international cooperation. Yet Congress has abdicated power and avoided adjudication, normalizing unchecked uses of force. As seen in Hungary and Ukraine, this uniquely facilitates both domestic and international collapse at the site of a functionally hollow global order. The app solves Congress to authorize force through the tests of divine national interest, reaffirming its role, addressing judicial ambiguity, and preventing the erosion of international norms. First thing is that if you do not follow the analytics that Annika said, do not settle for summary and final focus, read clarifications that sound about right, or check the doc. Hold the line if you cannot draw a line from what you wrote in second rebuttal to the rest of the debate, and you can't vote for it. But I will do the case proper now. We do not need to win case, since Kramer and Kemp alone, which I will extend later, is an impact turn to their arguments. The fiat illusory stuff is just not responsive, because our argument is that we ought to discuss a realistic way to engage the states. But they say that Congress is incapable of checking the president, but I'll read the evidence here, home 25. Combating casualties put pressure on lawmakers to abandon support, having Congress publicly affix name to operation, their political fortunes tied to success. The vote makes it difficult to attack the president for poor judgment, meaning that the Congress will check the government if they are given this power. Now, flag the following impact and the argument as an impact turn to their alt. We do not need to win case, because they just conceded the Kramer and Kemp evidence. We will explicitly concede their framework argument that we should look at who generates the best education, but this is an impact turn to that. A reason why engaging in politics in Congress is a good thing. They have conceded that a long-term study proves that because people want votes, engaging in politics is valuable because we can change policy. The Kramer and Kemp evidence analyzes things beyond just Trump. It says that historically, when people can engage with the state and create reform from the inside, we can solve some issues, even if it is not perfect. Think about reform policies such as the Civil Rights Act, Medicare, Medicaid, etc., that they all make impossible because they said engagement in politics is bad, which we have straight turned. This also straight turns their own role of the ballot, because it proves that their arguments are bad, fatalistic, and to always say Congress is bad and fascist, it means that we cannot create change. Even if we are not currently policymakers, learning about real-world issues allows us to engage in politics as something like voters, or if we do become policymakers, to actually activate change, or even to do micropolitics and activism within our own communities. Finally, you can do both on the alt. We have functionally agreed with their arguments. Yes, Congress is not perfect, but it is still better than the president, because the home card says that we can at least marginally solve that. That means we are in line with solving fascism, and we never said Congress is perfect, but it's the only possible solution. They have dropped that just doing their alt is worse. We learned about why the state is bad, why Congress is bad, but if we never do anything about it, because Congress always exists, we can never do anything about it if we do not engage Congress, because Congress will exist either way. Their model just says that we should give up and only learn about issues, about these issues, but not actually take a stand. A vote for Nueva means endorsing a method of politics where we understand that fascism exists, but we never do anything about it. We never organize politically. Conceded through rebuttal that their model does not teach us how to overcome these bad structures. They've also tried to tell you that we are unable to actually create these or become policymakers, but we've shown you that you are able to do micropolitics, etc., that actually does create changes and prevent things like the election of Trump.
Okay.
Okay, cool. We have 250. We'll take that.
2, we have 15 left. Case, starting with framing. Case. Room good. Judges? Awesome.
Our framing argument is not education broadly. It is a specific rule of the ballot claim that gives you a textual directive of how to understand it and a specific way to access this education. The role of the ballot is to vote for the team that most transformatively deconstructs the sovereign character of the law that's an epistemic prerequisite to interrogating concepts of the good and true that are always defined retroactively in ways that uphold the status quo monopoly of violence. That means it is a prior question to their education claims, which was conceded out of the last speech, because in order to understand what makes good or true education, we must first interrogate the way in which the law is constructed and always defines our understanding of those things, which is why they can never make actual change and will always just regurgitate the same things. They make all these arguments about policy change. Our argument was that they need to defend the specific way in which they've advocated for that policy change, i.e. we will defend our representations as tied to the method we have proposed, and they will defend them as tied to their method, insofar as we will read defense on, or extend autonomous defense on a case that will take it out. But then all of their arguments about how policy change is good. No, one, they conceded that reform just displaces violence, i.e. climate change and pandemics cause mass violence against minorities, but it's invisible, so we feel better about it now, even though we have not actually done anything. The second is that we are never going to be able to pass policies, voting, etc. It's very small scale and always co-opted by big bureaucratic forces. The third is that they make violence inevitable, because even if we do become policymakers, we will just become policymakers or voters who see invisible violence and just let it be, which means if we do that, then we are a better way to make critical people who look at it. The fourth is that they've just conceded the Mansfield evidence says that their orientation toward democracy allows the destruction of anything that is not deemed democratic and is in the way of it. That is, also allows, or concedes the fact that millions of people have been killed. You should read the evidence, or you should read the Mansfield evidence, and they have conceded, or all of their arguments about realistic solutions are wrong. Their realistic solutions will backfire by displacing violence, and we are a prerequisite to having better realistic solutions, because we are a way to interrogate it first. Conceded that we are a prerequisite to things like revolution in the first place, or more broad reforms that move past Congress, which can only happen when we first interrogate it. Now, okay. There are no anti-war when he sees the affirmative appeal of the congressional peace justifies war by using a lot of massive bipartisan commitment to war abroad. They seem to render clouding violence and modern legal or invisible through congressional representation engaging in liberal politics that allow the status quo globalization of warfare and policing as they fantasize about a return to conventional war vote, to reject when you see favor of a critical reading of war. Our method is key to uncovering how modern policy making legitimates violence and murders invisible. Understanding these course and reality is co-constitutive is a prerequisite to political alternatives. Now, the perm argument. No, our argument was that every link is a disadd to the perm. Our readings are prior questions, being able to actually engage them, which means we are a prerequisite because we must first understand our orientation to it. They will co-opt it, allow things like Congress to be invisible and legitimized through it, which just prevents any actual things from happening. Also, it gets co-opted, and we are a better starting point for revolution. Their case. They have conceded that they make Trumpian fascism invisible, because even if it is not happening in things like war, he will still be in the Epstein files, Congress will still approve things, etc., which is on net wars. They've conceded that Congress approved of Iran, and their evidence is specific to appropriations funding, which was allowed, should have been used by Congress, but Congress did not use it, which proves that that nothing actually happened. Their method failed, because even if policymaking can be good, their model is bad, and we have read specific links to their method of policymaking, which prove that it would overall be a bad policy, and that it is bad education for the debaters in the round.
Okay. Why was Trump elected?
What?
Why was Trump elected?
Sure. We think that there has been a displacement of the sort of problematic material conditions of Americans onto fear-mongering groups, for instance, immigrants, etc., and people say, oh, the reason why my paycheck is going down, or the reason why I'm facing more violence, must be because of them, and Trump was able to capitalize on that.
But why didn't Democrats turn out enough to beat Trump?
Well, I think this actually disproves all of your claims about voting and policy making.
Well, you don't even know where I'm
because
going.
we would say, I'm still making a response, but we would still say that, the fact that Trump got elected is not a cause of fascism, but rather a symptom of it. We have made a very clear structural claim this entire round that the way that American democracy and governance is inherently structured is always about the exclusion of other bodies. That's why when you pair things like realistic solutions, those solutions exclude brown and black people and poor people, which is what we aimed at. It'll be climate change and pandemic scenarios, right? You're gonna say why is Trump getting elected? We think that it's because of the original structure of the American governance system, which we have to go reading into. We'll take a question.
What is one way you would use political education for debate to do something?
Well, for example, I think that from debate, I've gained an understanding of how Congress works.
What have you done with
What'd
that?
that do though?
Wait, not know how Congress works, but now I think I'm like completely capable and have done work, for example, within our school in order to educate other people
Wait.
about how laws are passed and why certain laws
So
are
you did
problematic.
education about laws within the private Harker School of the Bay Area, and what did that do for politics in America?
We'd say that these small-scale examples, even if they are within our own schools, are examples of micropolitics where we are able to make change and change people's minds.
Wait, what is
Alice.
the material impact of the change you've made?
What do you mean?
You're
This-
telling me that you talked to people at Harker about the law. What is the material impact of that for
Well,
marginalized people?
Our argument isn't just about the law, it's that we also learned about issues like microplastics, harms, etc. And after that, I was actually less likely to use plastic. Wait,
Oh, so
Leah.
okay, so wait, sorry. The terminal impact of your offense is that you were less likely to use plastic. Cool. You
This
can
is
take a
our
question.
argument about it being self-reflexive. I.e., you can tell people, I will teach you about laws, and then maybe they know more about it. But the law can only refer back to itself, and there's no actual endpoint, which is why maybe at an individual level, you might use fewer microplastics, or people might know stuff, but you will never actually be able to challenge the underlying systems that uphold it without first deconstructing those, looking into those, and examining the way in which they make violence invisible. For instance, maybe the things you're using instead of plastic are actually worse for the environment, but they're hiding. You can have a question.
The issue with what you just said is that you assume that we can't do anything with the education that we have once
Wait, we
do
just
these
asked you what you did with the
micropolitics.
education that
I
you
just-
have, and you said that Leon uses less plastic, but that's cross.
the order will just be the alternative.
Is everyone ready? Okay. Everyone? Okay, cool. Voting negative can agree that the world is bad, but only voting affirmative can try and fix it. Remember, they have dropped a broad, overarching claim that Congress is inevitable no matter what we do. Yes, we agree with them. Congress may be bad in certain instances, but that does not mean that we should never try to engage in it at all. Remember, their argument is that we should only look at radical reform. We should only question and try to challenge broad structures such as fascism. Our argument is that unless we engage in Congress, unless we learn how to live our day-to-day lives and engage in the state, we can never do this. Remember, the Kremer and Kemp evidence and home evidence were all conceded. Crucially, they have dropped examples that Alice have gave in the last speech. For example, the Civil Rights Act, Medicare, Medicaid, etc. all prove that engagement within Congress can be a good thing, and all prove that their argument is too fatalistic because it says that we should reject engagement with the law and we should always question the law rather than trying to create change in it. Our argument is that yes, we may agree that Congress is bad, but only voting affirmative can do something within Congress because we can try to reform it from the inside. Crucially, they have dropped the Kremer and Kemp evidence, which is a study that indicates that because voters want to pander to the people, if people are more educated about the world, if people learn about real world issues and engage in Congress, then they can solve the issues that they talk about are bad. Every example they have given, for example, minorities being less represented in pandemics, etc., is a reason why engagement with politics is good, because as more and more people become knowledgeable about those issues and engage in Congress, engage in these structures, then we are sufficient to solve. You should not vote on a claim that we merely displace violence somewhere else, because the Kremer and Kemp evidence, as well as
as the examples that Alice gave are things that are examples of material progress. And even if we do not become policymakers, our argument is that we can still go out and do activism in the real world, and any risk that we can potentially become policymakers, for example, or learn how to vote or who to vote for, etc., outweighs. It's TOC finals. You cannot check out on they win the text of the roll of ballot. We have one that our education is good and our skill is good because engagement with the law is fundamentally good. When Annika inevitably stands up and says that reform creates an level of violence, remember that progress has been made, and we have cited several examples, all of which are dropped.
We'll take that.
We have 50 seconds.
The round's not over. Okay, we're gonna take some prep.
The order is going to go the quick on the framing, the K, and then the F. Time will start on my first word. Is anyone not ready?
The role of the ballot is to vote for the team that most transformatively deconstructs the sovereign character of the law. It's an epistemological prerequisite to interrogating concepts of good and true that are always defined retroactively in ways that uphold the status quo monopoly on violence. Their only response is it's TOC finals. It's not a warrant. They should have responded if they're in TOC finals. They've conceded the textuality, which means the only thing that your ballot can do is actually deconstruct this. Insofar as they have not provided a way to continue to construct this, you can just sign your ballot there, but then go to the K proper. There are no anti-war when it sees the affirmative appeal for congressional peace justifies war by using law to mask the bipartisan commitment of war abroad. They attempt to render the founding balance of the modern legal order invisible through congressional representation, engaging in liberal politics that allow the status quo globalization of war for implicitly they fantasize about return to a conventional war. Vote them to reject the money seen for a critical reading of war. A method is key to recovering on modern policy making, legitimates violence and renders it invisible, understanding discourse. And reality is co-concept of prerequisite to building political alternatives. The only response they give on this is that they tell you that the alt will not actually do anything. They've conceded A, the epistemological prerequisite analysis that all of their claims about state engagement being good can only be evaluated if you do us first, because what is defined as true and good is retroactively defined to overlap the hegemonic status quo character of the law. Second, they've conceded that we are a necessary prerequisite to any policy-making strategies. We have not blanket critiqued all policy-making. We've critiqued their specific faith in Congress. They tell you that Congress is inevitable. That doesn't mean we should have blind faith in it and believe that they have its invisible taken out by the epistemological prerequisite. All the analysis conceded that the alt is just a prior pressure to any political strategy. They try to tell you we're doing nothing. We are obviously doing something, and then placing faith in Congress always makes violence invisible, which is a conceded term case, but then will go to their case proper. First, there's no way for you to vote for them insofar as they don't extend case in the final focus. They try to tell you that policy making is good. They have not proved that the policy we're passing is good, which proves the fact that they just have blind faith in policy. Second, on the policy making education argument, they've conceded they could not do anything about it. Proven in Crossman, Leon says all he does is use less plastic for reach. We're actually able to carry not have faith in Congress. On the Kramer and Keck, we ended these examples. We said that climate change is not being solved for, and pandemics always kills minorities and people of color. And the Epstein Files analysis conceded that Trump has been allowed to rape women and stay in the office of the president. Look, when you vote affirmative, all you do is allow Trump to continue doing violence, but we just make it invisible. They also concede the Trump visibility term, which is clean from rebuttal, that when they make Trump invisible by putting faith in Congress, then that means that the violence he does is allowed to continue, which means that we have faith about it. And they concede that we are a prerequisite to any form of critical policy making per the epistemology analysis, which means even if you want a policy to work to deconstruct fascism, you always have to provide this. Look, if you affirm, all you do is let more brown people die and pretend that it's in the faith of Congress. Negate.
Hold on, we gotta get the internet first. Thank you for all participating in the final round of Gold Public Forum here at the TOC. Sorry.
Should we give our finalists one more round of applause?
Yes, please. Congratulations to both teams. It is a 3-0 decision for the con from the Nueva School. Everyone can remain quiet for for just a moment would be appreciated. We'll turn it over to our panel for any comments they may have.
I'm happy to start. I'll read what I've written. I vote con for Nueva for proceeding with war, while I think engaging Congress may be valuable and the democracy can promote good, proven by the empirics with the primary camp. I think the pros missing specific defense of their method of achieving that progress, i.e. the utilization of conflict control and war powers. The pro drop of approval just creates invisible violence.
Cool, sure. Yeah, I think the pro is missing a specific defense of their method of achieving progress, i.e. the utilization of Congress and controlling war powers. Pro drops that approval just creates invisible violence, which is worse because it is concealed from our view. And the pro is not really extending a specific mechanism for reining in / solving democracy and or the impacts of Trump. I don't care much about the text of the roll of ballot, but Nueva does have a conceded prerequisite argument why interrogating underlying epistemologies is a prior question to understanding what is good and desirable. I think the prerequisite cuts against the pro-fatalism argument, which I think also does have merit. I think both final focuses would have benefited from spending more time here. I agree with the con final focus characterization that the pro in this debate is displaying a blind faith in Congress, which also makes the prerequisite argument make more sense to me. So the TLDR is I do think engagement with politics can be good, but I think the con is winning that the pro's specific engagement with politics in this debate is bad, which I should reject if I care about accessing any of the benefits of possible state engagement or just the impacts of state violence, which could get replicated in invisible ways. Other than that, I thought it was a really good debate. I've really enjoyed judging y'all throughout the year. I think it's been 8 times one of you, 6 times the other one of you, and this was the most clear and most flowable round between all of you that I've judged. So thank you for that. All of y'all are amazing debaters and have done a wonderful job. It's been a really good year, so be proud of yourself.
Before I give my RFD, I want to echo what Ishan just said. Those of you that are in the room and watch the debate, I think that these are 4 great debaters to emulate, look up to as examples of the good that debate can do. And I think that this round was excellent. I enjoyed judging both of you throughout the year. I enjoyed judging this round. It's always a privilege to do so. I voted negative. The affirmative final focus, I think, makes 3 arguments. 1, Congress is inevitable and we should engage with politics in order to provide specific solutions to specific problems. 2, the conceded evidence from Kremer and Kemp to assert that engagement in Congress results in reforms, such as the Civil Rights Act, Medicare, Medicaid, etc., proving that the negative critique is fatalistic. 3, having these sorts of policy debates is key to give people the skills they need to resolve violence. Therefore, a risk of the AFS method being good is a reason to affirm. All 3 of these arguments I end up finding unpersuasive. The first is Congress is inevitable. I think the negative has critiqued this assumption from the constructive and from the links that are in the negative constructive speech. Appeals to political systems and the law as being inevitable are self-serving attempts to retroactively justify violence. The AF's appeal to Congress as an arbiter of fairness is wrong and engages in a fantasy that we ought not endorse. Given that the affirmative has conceded the K framework, the argument that epistemology comes first, and the role of the ballot in the final focus, I think that the presumption that the AF has made that Congress is inevitable is simply incorrect from the level of structural critique. In fact, throughout the round, Nueva makes the argument that they are putting this blind faith in a system being inevitable that we need to interrogate in order to break down. I actually don't think that the AF rebuttal has a holistic claim that the state is inevitable, or systems of the state are good, or that the United States government is a valuable tool of study that is supported with a more holistic structural analysis. You have arguments that democracy solves existential threats, or that Congress's power to constrain Trump is necessary to resist fascism, but I think that the critique of the negative is far more structural than what do we do to respond to the present political moment. I think that you need a much stronger defense of the structure that you have endorsed as a good way of resolving violence in the affirmative constructive in order for me to feel like I could vote AF, which is, I think, the single biggest mistake of the AF rebuttal speech. The second argument that is made is reform is possible. The AF is correct that the Kremer and Kemp evidence is conceded, and it does make the argument that there are material reforms that have demonstrated progress. But given that there is not a systemic justification for why these good things are enough to put our faith in the state in most or all instances, I think that the negative extension of counterexamples that prove the ineffectiveness of Congress or the US government more broadly, climate change, pandemics, holding Trump accountable for the Epstein files, etc., are all these examples that at minimum suggest that there is a mixed bag when we put our faith in the legal system, and therefore it justifies the broader structural critique that is made by the extension of the link arguments in the negative final focus. The last thing is policy debates are good to resolve violence. I don't know if this argument in and of itself, given the other two, would have even been sufficient to vote affirmative, but I look at it anyway. The Mansfield 11 evidence is conceded from the negative constructive onwards, which straight turns this argument in the notion of investment in democracy itself. I will say throughout this debate, I wish that this specific clash point had happened more directly throughout. There was an extension of Mansfield 11 on the links page of the criticism, while there was an extension of the Kramer and Kemp evidence broadly at the bottom of every AF speech, but they're never really directly interactive until the second final focus. But I also don't really think it matters kind of at the framework level of the debate, given that both of you seem to be having a debate about policy in a sense. Their argument is that the way you have engaged in policy is problematic, as Ishan already said. So I just don't necessarily think this is a valid critique of the negatives method. So, in sum, the negative has a more holistic link story to explain how violence is inherent in the systems of the US government, and the affirmative has failed to justify their specific engagement in those structures, nor those structures more broadly in order to affect material change, which means I voted negative. Want to emphasize again, great round, love all four of you.
I have not judged all four of you as often as my colleagues on the panel have, but from, I think it was Kentucky's tournament in September, I had been talking about the team from Nueva, and I was so thankful this morning in the quarterfinal round that you all made the arguments that my brain was saying should be made, because there was a lot going on there. As the long time coach who thinks about the world still from what policy debate looked like back in the 1980s, I would like to thank you all for making this a debate which, as long as you got some debate experience, it was an accessible debate, because there was a lot going on. There was a lot of stuff everywhere, and I was still able to understand where each debater was and where each debater wanted me to go throughout the debate. Obviously, with a less experienced group of folks, you could have taken that down a notch, and I'm sure you could have, and still really expressed the things that you wanted judges to believe. And I think that is perhaps another really important educational example that this rather large audience could take from this, is that you didn't blow me off. You didn't say, wow, these two young, hip individuals are going to be totally down with everything we're doing, so just ignore Kaczmarek. I had to work to pay attention, but it was worth it, because there was a lot of really good stuff being said, and so that's kind of like the unique that I want to bring to this. I also found that the need to interrogate, as opposed to blindly accepting Congress, was more persuasively argued by the con. I think if the examples of stuff like the Civil Rights Act had been introduced earlier in the debate, the con might have had some thoughts and feelings on that subject a bit more specifically, because one of the things that Congress, in collusion with the president, is trying to do right now is roll back a lot of those civil rights, and the Supreme Court as well, roll back a lot of those civil rights gains from the past, which would have been a pretty good current events example, but since it only appeared in first final, it would probably not have been time, or perhaps a good idea to take it into that direction as well. I don't think the probe proves that we can work through Congress, and I think the Grand Cross was, the minute in Grand Cross about the less plastics was probably the best use of Grand Cross I've seen all season. loads of ethos and a bit of humor as well, but demonstrates that the four of you are definitely used to debating against one another, and that you also like each other, so thank you all.